Hello and welcome to another episode of Back in My Day. This week we're looking at 1994 Jim Carrey classic, The Mask.
We'll open fire!
Of course, what can I tell you about The Mask? It's set in the fictional Edge City. It's based on a comic book, so it was a comic book movie before we knew they were cool. It's set around Stanley Ipkiss, a quiet bank clerk who discovers this mask that gives him superpowers, effectively. I think that's the only way to describe it. But superpowers in a very cartoonish comic book way.
Spoken!
He falls in love with nightclub singer Tina Carlisle, who's played by Cameron Diaz, whose partner is also Dorian Tyrell, the local gangster who wants the mask so he can take over the whole of the city. Of course, the main plot of the story is that Stanley discovers that he, through the mask, he can become the person he wants to be. With some traits maybe that he doesn't want to do, but he certainly builds his confidence, and we see that as the story develops. Meanwhile, once Dorian discovers what the mask is, Dorian decides that he wants the mask so he can become this super gangster and take over the whole city.
Okay, Twinkle Toes. I want to know where my money is, and I want to know right now.
It's a brilliantly comedic and energetic. It's light-hearted. It's full of slapstick humour. It really is full of slapstick humour, and it's fast-paced. It does a brilliant job of blending the real world with the cartoonish effects. And I do think a lot of that has to come down to the fact that Jim Carrey is wearing the mask. He has this brilliantly green mask with these massive white teeth, which actually they put in as a prop originally, and he was to actually ADR his voiceovers afterwards. But Jim Carrey at the time just spent some time, got used to him, which is why actually when you listen back, you can hear when he speaks to the mask, he has a little bit of a lisp. What can I say about the tone? We've got this sort of world that's set almost in a film noir type scenario, and then that sort of suits the way that the mask dresses himself, but he's this bright sort of shining star in this film noir world. He comes into rooms and lights them up, whether it's through his comedy, through the action sequences. It is built around set pieces, let's not lie, as comedies go. This one is very much built around its set pieces, but Jim Carrey again just brings those brilliant things. It's really fast paced, and at the time the CGI was traditionally used for more mainstream sort of Hollywood big blockbuster movies, not necessarily comedies, but this really brought the CGI and its uses towards not just the big blockbusters, but how it could be used in smaller budgeted films. The film became a cultural touchstone for its innovative CGI use. Carrey's breakout performance, he'd done Ace Ventura before this, he'd been in Earth Girls Are Easy way before that, and he'd done a few films here and there, but Ace Ventura was his breakout earlier in the year. Then he did The Mask, and The Mask really gave him an opportunity to show who Jim Carrey was. Ace Ventura, he's being very much the human aspects of Ace Ventura almost restrict what Jim Carrey's capable of doing, whereas in The Mask he's allowed to play on that. Later in the year, Dumb and Dumber comes out, so you can tell by the end of the year that Jim Carrey is one of the most bankable stars, and certainly one of the biggest stars on the planet by the end of the year. Released in 1994, it really did fit with this growing era of CGI. It was this brilliant sort of almost family comedy, I think, is the only way to describe it. I remember being really young, but I remember absolutely loving it and thinking it was brilliant. It does have some sort of tones to it, but what I will say is that I did watch it with my family this weekend, and my 4-year-old has now added it to his playlist as one of his favourite movies. He absolutely adores The Mask. He does want to skip the first sort of 20 minutes of story, but he does love the moments with The Mask. So I'm going to try and track down the animated series for him.
Got you with my winning smile. I'm a living lesson in flowing style. Just can't help but stare at myself while fair.
Of course, if you've seen the film, you know it's full of catchphrases.
Ooh, somebody stop me.
It's one of those films that is just so quotable for those catchphrases. It led to, I know certainly from my experience, schoolyards versions of it and people doing the impressions in schoolyards. It also introduced the world to Cameron Diaz. This was her first feature film. She went on to obviously have a stellar career, but this was the sort of way she really does sort of introduce herself as the femme fatale, but as the story develops, they give a little bit more sort of development to the character, as it plays really a little bit with the sort of structure of noir films. The film was a huge commercial success. It cost $23 million to make. It made $351 million worldwide. It made it the highest grossing comic book movie versus its budget. until 2019 when The Joker came out, which is amazing to think when you've got all of those massive blockbusters, all these Avengers movies, all of these sorts of films. Actually, it was a 1994 comic book adaptation called The Mask that was the significant holder of that title right up until, as I said, the Joker came out. It was one of the highest grossing films in 1994. It significantly boosted the careers of all of the cast involved. And as I said before, Ace Ventura, this, The Mask, and then Dumb and Dumber really made Jim Carrey a massively bankable star. Development-wise, so it's based on a Dark Horse comic. The film underwent significant changes as it went through its writing stages. So in 1990, it was originally started to be written. It was the comic book is much darker, or at least it was until the film came out. Was much darker, where the lead character was actually called Big Head, and what he tended to do was you would put him on because you wanted to do good, but not necessarily deliver on that good, or you would, but maybe in a much more violent way. Think along the lines of the Punisher, if you will. You know, when it came to casting, the role of Stanley Ipkiss was tailored for Jim Carrey. It was done to capitalise on his unique ability to do those things. But before we even got to that point, there was talk of Robin Williams, Martin Short, Rick Moranis, and even Nick Cage playing the lead character. It did undergo rewrites throughout all of those phases, but Nick Cage was one of the final ones that they rewrote it for before they cast Jim Carrey. And then director Chuck Russell made the comment that he believes that Carrey saved him about $1 million in CGI with his ability to just do his rubber face thing, you know, the thing that Jim Carrey was so brilliantly renowned for at that point of his career. It was just a fantastic thing, and the director talked about how important it was that Carrey played that role, and how the film wouldn't have necessarily been as good if it hadn't been for Carrey, because he wanted to base all of those face movements off a real thing. Of course, the CGI effects were groundbreaking, especially the mass transformations. It set a new standard for visual effects in comedies, but across the board, it really does a good job of balancing the dark tones of the original comic and this noir world, and then sort of transforming it into this really cartoonish, brilliant world that we sort of get. Obviously, if we're looking at themes throughout it, you know, Stanley's transformation, very early on, we get a psychologist talking about the masks we wear. And we see that effectively what Stanley's done there is Stanley has, he finds through the mask who he really wants to be, and it allows him to be the person he wants to be, and it helps him with his suppressed desires and his confidence, and it illustrates really themes of self-discovery. You know, Stanley evolves from being this shy, downtrodden person to someone who embraces his confidence. And we don't just see that in the form of the mask, we see that in the form of Stanley as well. And then the mask, of course, symbolises the latent power within everybody to change their own ability. That's the easiest way to describe it. You know, it's that sort of self-inspirational thing that goes through it. As for the performances, Jim Carrey is just Jim Carrey. You know, this is... Can you say this is peak Jim Carrey? I mean, he's got Liar Liar and Ace Ventura to come after it. He really builds, but I mean, this is peak physical Jim Carrey, I would argue. This is him at his physical best with his facial features and his ability to do it. Cameron Diaz's debut performance, obviously, it set her on the Hollywood career path that we saw. Interestingly, Peter Green, when he transformed into the mask, he became a much more sort of physically demanding presence as Dorian. So they actually used WCW wrestler Robert Swenson, who was also most famous for playing the original Bane in Batman and Robin, and Garrett T. Sato as well, who both played masked versions of Tyrell. The direction of the film itself, you know, a director of a comedy never really gets the credit they deserve, because I suppose if you're directing a comedy, especially one with Jim Carrey or the likes of Seth Rogen or Will Ferrell, effectively what you're trying to do is you're trying to create an atmosphere where those comedic actors can bring their best foot forward. And all you can say about Chuck Russell's direction here is he does that. He gives Jim Carrey the perfect vehicle to be able to give him his talent and show exactly what Jim Carrey is so good at. As for the cinematography, you know, it does a really good job of blending the bright colours, the dynamic camera work. We see some fantastic dance sequences throughout it. There's some set pieces, you know. There's nothing that you'd say, oh my god, that blows my mind, that stands out. But actually, you know, the dance sequences, the blend of CGI and realism in the dance sequences show that there was a lot of work put into that. Of course, the big thing for it was the soundtrack. Cameron Diaz didn't sing. Anybody who's seen My Best Friend's Wedding knows that Cameron Diaz is not a great singer. Or at least, is she? Well, she's a good actress, so maybe she's not. But Cameron Diaz doesn't sing in this. They do dub her. But what we do is we get some really, really great swing music, and swing musicians talked about in the aftermath of The Mask. Swing record sales increased, more people started attending swing venues, so it's quite an interesting sort of side effect to The Mask, was the reintroduction or the introduction of swing music to people. As for its influence, obviously there was the spin-off TV show, which, doing my research for this, I found out in the very last episode is a crossover episode with Ace Ventura, the animated TV show. Who knew? But yeah, what we got was the spin-off TV show, we got the Son of Mask movie, which wasn't great and had no real touchstone to the original, but still we got to see a few other movies out of it. Comic book wise, the comics ran for a few years after that. The dimensions and the direction of the comic changed dramatically after the film. It went from being less of the hyper-violent and more along the family sort of comedy humour side of things, which was certainly quite interesting.
Hold on to your lug nuts. It's time for an overhaul.
As for my review, The Mask has its set pieces, and they're the ones you remember. I think about the mechanics. I think about in the alley with the Tommy gun. I'm thinking about these absolutely brilliant scenes that Jim Carrey has just given the opportunity to go, and they blend these CGI relatively well. Even by today's standards, I say it's relatively well. At the time, it was exceptionally well. I could sit here and pick holes in the whole film. I could go through it and I could talk about narrative difficulty and things like that, but actually I just enjoyed the film. I watched it with my children over the weekend, and I've got to say, as I said before, my 4-year-old absolutely adored it. He thinks he loves it, the comic silliness. It captures sort of an innocence in violence as well, the innocence and violence that we got with Tom and Jerry and the Roadrunner cartoons, and it does a really good job of blending that with this sort of real world. Would it have been the same movie if it wasn't for Jim Carrey? Probably not. It's definitely Carrey's ability to mix his own stretchy face with the CGI, and it gives The Mask its true heart. Is it true to the comic? Absolutely not. Is it still funny and mostly unoffensive? Yes. The Mask is slapstick humour at its best. It's Jim Carrey. It's silly. It's funny. And it is available on Amazon Prime if you're in the UK right now. And available to buy and rent in all the other digital places.
That's a spicy meatball.
Make sure you give us a like and a follow if you think what I'm doing is interesting, or if it's interesting to you. If it's interesting to somebody else, share it with them as well. That would be quite nice. In the meantime, have a great day, and I'll see you again next week for Clear and Present Danger.